Imagine this: a cold night, a lonely bus stop, and a young man who has nothing but kindness in his heart. He sees a woman shivering in the freezing air, and without thinking twice, he takes off his only jacket and offers it to her. What he didn't know is that this simple act of compassion would change his life forever. Because that woman was no ordinary stranger. She was a CEO who held the power to rewrite his destiny. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to our channel, Gentle Words, where we bring you the most heart-touching stories that inspire the soul. It was one of those nights when the city felt colder than usual. The kind of cold that crept through your bones and reminded you of how alone you truly were. The kind of cold that made the homeless curl tighter into their thin blankets and made the fortunate rush to their heated homes, barely noticing the people they brushed past. Daniel, a young man in his mid-20s, stood at the edge of a dimly lit bus stop, his backpack slung over his shoulder and his hands buried deep into the pockets of his worn-out jeans. Life hadn't been easy for him, juggling between part-time jobs, trying to pay off student debt, and barely managing to cover rent in a rundown apartment had drained him more than he cared to admit. Still, there was something unbreakable about his spirit. He didn't complain much, didn't let bitterness define him, and though life gave him very little, he still found reasons to share. That night, as he stood waiting for the last bus home after finishing a long shift at a grocery store, his eyes caught sight of a figure sitting quietly on the metal bench a few feet away. The woman looked out of place, not because of her presence, but because of how fragile and vulnerable she seemed against the cruel winter night. She was shivering, clutching her arms around herself, her business suit offering little warmth against the icy wind. Daniel's brows furrowed. He could tell she had been waiting a while, her breath forming visible clouds in the air, her lips trembling slightly as she tried to keep herself together. She didn't look like someone who belonged at a lonely bus stop at this hour. Her polished shoes, expensive-looking briefcase, and the faint elegance in her demeanor hinted at a different world, one Daniel could only dream of entering. But right now, she looked less like a powerful person and more like a human being caught in the harshness of the night. Without thinking twice, Daniel unzipped his jacket. The only jacket he had. A faded navy one that had protected him through countless cold nights. He hesitated for a brief second, aware that giving it away meant he would have to endure the freezing ride home, but his heart left no room for doubt. Quietly, he stepped toward her. "Excuse me," he said gently, not wanting to startle her. The woman looked up, her eyes wide with surprise, and for a moment Daniel noticed how tired they were, carrying a weight that even her confident attire couldn't hide. "You look cold," he continued, offering her the jacket. "Here, take this. It's warmer than sitting here like that." She blinked, almost as if she didn't understand why a stranger would do such a thing. "Oh, I couldn't," she stammered, her voice trembling not just from the cold but from disbelief. Daniel gave a small smile. "You can, and you should. I'll be fine. Please." Slowly, almost reluctantly, she reached out and accepted the jacket, slipping it over her shoulders. The warmth must have felt like a sudden blessing, because her expression softened, her body relaxing just a little. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking with genuine gratitude. Daniel nodded. "No problem. No one should freeze out here." For a moment, silence fell between them, the only sound being the distant hum of cars passing by and the occasional rustling of the winter wind. Daniel didn't ask who she was, didn't pry into why she was there so late, and didn't question how someone who looked like she belonged in an executive office ended up shivering at a lonely bus stop. To him, kindness was never about asking questions. It was about giving what you could when someone needed it most. Little did he know this act, so small in his eyes, so instinctive, was planting the seed of a future he couldn't have imagined. The following days after that cold night at the bus stop unfolded in ways Daniel could never have predicted. For life has a mysterious way of taking the simplest acts and weaving them into threads of destiny, and while he thought he had merely given away his jacket to a stranger, he had unknowingly opened the first page of a chapter that would redefine who he was and what his future would hold. The woman, whose name was revealed to him the very next morning, when he got a call from an unfamiliar number, introduced herself as Victoria Hale, a name Daniel vaguely remembered hearing before in the city's business news, though he never paid much attention, because the world of CEOs and billionaires felt galaxies away from his modest life. Yet here she was, speaking directly to him with a warmth that contrasted the icy evening when they first met. thanking him once again for his kindness and insisting that she owed him more than just gratitude. At first Daniel felt awkward, unsure of how she had even managed to get his number, until she explained that she had found his work ID in the pocket of the jacket he lent her, and had asked around until she reached him. And though a part of him worried that she might be upset at his intrusion, she instead seemed deeply touched, confessing that it had been years since anyone had treated her with such selfless compassion without expecting anything in return. She invited him to meet her for coffee, insisting she wanted to thank him properly, and though Daniel hesitated, thinking perhaps he didn't belong in the kind of cafes she probably frequented, something in her tone made him agree. That meeting became the turning point of his life. When Daniel walked into the upscale cafe that weekend, he felt out of place immediately, his faded jeans and scuffed shoes contrasting sharply with the polished interior and the neatly dressed professionals sipping lattes while typing on sleek laptops. But then he saw her, Victoria, dressed in a simple but elegant coat, her smile genuine as she waved him over, as though he were an old friend rather than a stranger who had shown her kindness. She thanked him once more, but this time she listened too, listened as Daniel spoke about his life, his struggles with making ends meet, his part-time jobs, his unfinished degree he had put on hold because tuition was too high, and the way he tried to remain hopeful despite the obstacles. Victoria listened with an intensity that surprised him, nodding, occasionally asking questions, not once judging him for what he lacked but rather admiring the resilience in his words. Then, after a pause, she leaned forward and said something that made Daniel's world tilt. "Daniel, people often underestimate how far kindness can go. The world can be cold, but a single act of warmth can change everything. You gave me that jacket without hesitation, not knowing who I was. That told me more about your character than any sum ever could. And I believe someone like you deserves more than the life you're struggling through." Daniel blinked, unsure of what to say, unsure even if he had heard her correctly, but before he could gather his thoughts, she continued, "I want to offer you an opportunity. Come work with me at Hale Enterprises. You don't need to worry about qualifications just yet, I see potential in you, and potential is worth more than any degree. I'll mentor you myself, if you're willing to work hard." The words felt surreal, like something out of a movie. Daniel's first instinct was to refuse politely. After all, it sounded too generous, too impossible, but Victoria's sincerity disarmed him. She wasn't pitying him, nor was she handing him charity, she was offering him a chance, the kind of chance people like him only dreamed of. He went home that night torn between disbelief and hope, lying awake in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over until finally, he whispered to himself, "What do I have to lose?" And so the next week, Daniel found himself walking into the towering glass building of Hale Enterprises, heart pounding as he stepped into a world he never imagined being part of. At first, everything overwhelmed him. The sleek offices, the fast-paced environment, the confident employees dressed in suits that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Yet Victoria stood by her word, she guided him patiently, assigning him tasks, teaching him the ropes, pushing him to learn but never letting him drown. He worked harder than ever, driven not just by the opportunity but by a desire to prove himself worthy of the faith she had placed in him. And slowly, he began to change. He discovered skills he didn't know he had, an eye for detail, an ability to connect with people, a knack for problem-solving under pressure. Colleagues who initially doubted him grew to respect him, impressed by his dedication and humility. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel rose steadily, from being the quiet newcomer to becoming a voice people listened to. Through it all, his bond with Victoria deepened, not as employer and employee alone but as mentor and mentee, and, perhaps, as friends who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. But Daniel's journey was not without challenges. He faced envy from some who whispered about how quickly he was rising, attributing it to favoritism rather than his effort. He faced doubt within himself too, haunted by the fear that he didn't belong, that one day the illusion would shatter, and he'd be sent back to the bus stop where it all began. Yet every time those fears threatened to consume him, he remembered that cold night, the moment he chose compassion over comfort, and how that single choice had rewritten his story. It reminded him that perhaps the key to life wasn't about being perfect or having everything, but about giving what you could when it mattered most. And then came the day Victoria revealed the true reason why his kindness had moved her so deeply. They were in her office late one evening, going over a project, when she sighed and shared a piece of her past she rarely told anyone. Years ago, she said softly, staring out the window at the city lights, I was in a position not so different from yours. I had nothing, no one believed in me, and I almost gave up. One stranger showed me kindness, offered me help without expecting anything, and that changed the course of my life. I built everything I have today because of that chance, and when you offered me your jacket that night, Daniel, I saw the same spirit in you. The same light. And I knew I couldn't just walk away. Her voice trembled slightly, and for the first time, Daniel saw not the powerful CEO but the human beneath, the woman who had fought her own battles and carried her own scars. And in that moment, he understood. Kindness had not only connected their stories but created a cycle, a ripple that extended far beyond what either of them could see.